Could medical assistance in dying really be extended to minors? Plus, a judge deemed the Prime Minister as justified in invoking the Emergencies Act. To discuss these topics, plus a whole lot more, is our political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist, Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, so great to have you with us again.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Brian, medical assistance in dying, or MAID as it's known, continues to be a hot topic in Ottawa and, of course, everywhere. So, last week, a report called for extending MAID to minors. And did this get the support of all parties?
No, it did not. The Conservatives issued a dissenting report saying they don't agree with the idea of extending it to minors. If you remember some of the hearings that have gone on over the past few months, there were doctors who showed up saying extend MAID to infants, to newborns. A lot of disturbing and very upsetting testimony coming from various groups. But the majority on this special committee of MPs and senators said, you know what, we should extend medical assistance in dying to minors. They don't want to put an age on it, but the minor in question should have mental competence to be able to make that decision on their own with independence. So, it's very vague. I'm not sure how you even take that recommendation and put it forward into a policy that is easy to follow, but also to enforce, so that you're not turning around and saying, well, a 6-year-old, let's give them MAID because they asked for it. That's, one concern. They did say, there's been the discussion of extending medical assistance in dying to people with mental illness, people dealing with depression. They did say that, no, that shouldn't be the case with minors. With minors, it should be only if their death is reasonably foreseeable, which is kind of where we started at the beginning. The argument for bringing in MAID was people who have terminal cancer, who are in excruciating pain towards their end of their lives. Shouldn't they be allowed to end it on their own terms with the assistance of a doctor? And that was put forward as the compassionate route. And of course, we've gone down a slippery slope that I don't think a lot of people expected. Some warned there was a slippery slope, but I think we've gone further than even what we were being warned about. And now this report. So this is going to create a lot more discussion, a lot more controversy, and a lot more questions about how you actually do it. It's so vague in my view that I'm not sure how you would.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, Brian, another big news item. Justice Rouleau's report came out on Friday, finding the government was justified in invoking the Emergencies Act last year during the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. So the judge had some criticisms, though, of the government, and he said that he arrived at his conclusion reluctantly. So what did you make of that, Brian?
It sounded like he was giving them a pass, but barely. Reminded me of my grade 10 French teacher saying, look, if you promise not to come back next year, I'll give you a 51 and you can get the grade, but don't come back. It was that sort of thing. He said that he found the government's decision to invoke the act was justified, but that he arrived at that reluctantly. He added beyond that the body of evidence before him was not overwhelming. That's not a reigning endorsement of the government's conclusion. Now, how did he arrive at that? He also, by the way, said reasonable and informed people could easily have arrived at a different position, a different answer than he did. That's where I am. How did he do that, though? He accepted a lot of the government's positions put forward around how to interpret the Emergencies Act, how you had to apply the definition of what is or is not a national security threat. And the government said, well, we interpreted it differently than the law is written. I didn't buy that. I didn't think that was valid. If you remember, they had their own secret legal opinion that said that they were justified, that they wouldn't even share with the committee. I didn't think that was valid. Justice Rouleau did give them a pass on a lot of these things that I wouldn't have, that others wouldn't have. But it's in the end, I'm not sure that even if he had found them not justified, that it would have changed much. I mean, there's no recourse from that. And I know some people wanted the prime minister to resign if he was found not justified. that's not how inquiries work, and that wouldn't have happened. It just would have been a black mark on his record and another tool for the opposition to go after him with.
Was that specifically what you were concerned about, that you wrote in one of your articles? You had some concerns about his recommendations to amend this act?
So that whole issue of how you define a national emergency. So the Emergencies Act says that a national security emergency, which is what they called, needs to be national in scope. It needs to threaten the national security of the country as defined in Section 2 of the CSIS Act. The government took that to mean, or some people tried to say, well, that means CSIS has to decide if there's a national emergency. That's not the case. You just have to use the definition. The government said they're going to use a different definition, that they're going to use more inputs. Justice Rouleau said this is all too confusing, and in the future, you should take the definition out of the CSIS Act and amend the Emergencies Act. I worry that that will be used by the government to just water down how you define a national security incident where you can invoke this act. The Emergencies Act should not be easy to invoke. It grants the government extraordinary powers. It suspends civil liberties. It should be hard, and there should be strict definitions. And I think that the framers of this bill from the 1980s and the Mulroney government, with assistance, by the way, from the opposition parties of today, I think they did a good job. The Trudeau government muddied the waters here with their interpretation of it. I don't want to see them muddy the waters by amending it, so I'm worried that that may happen. Any amendment that says we'll take it out of CSIS Act and put it directly into the Emergencies Act, that has to be airtight. It can't leave room for wiggle room.
And then speaking of Rouleau, Brian, aren't there some strange claims that Justice Rouleau could be somehow related to Trudeau through marriage? Have these claims been substantiated?
They haven't. Look, I wrote about Justice Rouleau having liberal ties when he was first appointed last April. He is someone who, when he was a young man, worked for the Liberal Party and leader of the day, John Turner. John Turner ran for Liberal leadership. Justice Rouleau was part of his team. When he won the Liberal leadership and became Prime Minister, he helped pick his cabinet, worked in his office for several years, but then moved on, became a lawyer, became a judge. There's no record that he's even donated since he became a judge in what I think was 2002. But there have been these claims that Pierre Trudeau's sister married a guy named Paul Rouleau, and Pierre Rouleau, and that's Paul Rouleau's brother. Paul Rouleau, Justice Rouleau, doesn't have a brother named Pierre. Further to that, Justice Rouleau's about 70, maybe. Suzette Trudeau is Pierre Trudeau's older sister. She's long passed. She would have been about 109, I think. I'm just doing quick math in my head. That her husband was older than her. You're not going to have a brother that's 30, 40 years or more older than you. That just doesn't happen. And so, no, there is no family relationship there. That keeps being put out as some people trying to say why he arrived at his view, at his conclusion. That's not the case. I disagree with the report, but fight it using facts. Don't use it fighting falsehoods, because it doesn't help anybody.
Right. Good to put those claims to bed, that's for sure. Okay, on Friday, Prime Minister Trudeau not only responded to the Rouleau report, but he also had to respond to the new allegations that China interfered in our 2019 and 2021 elections. And Brian, he responded by not being outraged at China, but by wanting to expose the person who blew the whistle on this. So what did this surprise you at all? Like, did his response surprise you?
It worries me. It worries me greatly that this is his response. Just like last fall, when the first allegations came out that there'd been 11 candidates, $250,000 from the Chinese consulate in Toronto spread to 11 candidates. Now we know the claim is 9 Liberal, 2 Conservatives that they decided to back because these candidates, we don't know their names, were more open to the views of the Chinese Communist Party. We don't know if they won. We don't know if they lost. But that was the claim last fall for the 2019 election. On Friday comes reports citing CSIS documents seen by the Globe and Mail that say it was 2021 as well, and that the goal was to defeat candidates like Kenny Chiu out in Vancouver, Bob Soroya in the Toronto area, and others who were critical of China, supportive of Taiwan, supportive of Hong Kong, but critical of the dictators in Beijing, that they wanted to ensure that the Trudeau Liberals won that election. Justin Trudeau just downplayed that there was any impact at all. The Globe saw the internal documents from CSIS where people are bragging about defeating Conservatives, where they're laying out their plans and how they would do it. And Justin Trudeau just downplays this, but then says he's very concerned about these documents being leaked by CSIS, and he wants to go, CSIS better look for the whistleblower. That's completely the wrong reaction. Be outraged at the election interference. Trudeau wants to say that it didn't affect the outcome. How do we know that? This task force that he had, the Conservatives raised these issues with the task force. Waleed Solomon, who was Aaron O'Toole's appointee to it, said it was met with a shrug of the shoulders. They did nothing. And so time and again, the Trudeau Liberals just downplay this. Even if it only changed the outcome for one riding, Canadians should know. It doesn't have to mean that the government's going to change, but one riding, somebody gets elected because China decides that person is better than the other one. Well, we should know.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, Brian, another item that slipped under the radar for some on Friday was the release of the federal government's Sustainable Jobs Plan, which is the new name for the just transition. So do people in Alberta have a reason to be concerned about this plan?
Oh, absolutely, because it's aimed four square at the oil and gas industry in Western Canada. And it doesn't have a lot of details. It's 32 pages, talks about moving towards a clean energy economy, away from dirty oil and dirty gas. It gives no credence to the fact that liquefied natural gas and natural gas general are cleaner burning fuels. The whole world sees them as a transition fuel, but the Trudeau government doesn't. So there's none of that. It's just about how to move people into clean energy jobs, how to move away from the oil and gas industry, but with no details in the 32 pages. It's worrying federal conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, who responded to it saying, well, Vladimir Putin's smiling today because this is the government's plan to wind down Canada's oil and gas industry. Well, that only helps people like Putin and other nefarious countries that have oil and gas. Danielle Smith said she's incredibly worried about what it means for workers in Alberta in the future. I agree with both of them. This is something to be concerned about. The government's been talking about this for a long time. They released their plan, very few details, just that they're moving ahead. When that happens, be worried, be very worried.
Mm-hmm. Okay, real quick here. The Roxham Road border crossing is in the news again, with Quebec's premier writing to the Trudeau government saying that his province is full, send them elsewhere, send them away. Of course, he's talking about the illegal border crossing, which saw, nearly 5,000 migrants enter the country in December, and Quebec saying it's overloaded the province's social services. So what are the feds doing about this now?
Well, they're busing them from Quebec to Ontario. Soon they could be going to New Brunswick. Maybe they'll go to other provinces. Legault says send them everywhere but here. What's been happening is for the last little while, Roxham Road's been a big issue for 5 years now, 6 years. But for the last little while, people that come across at the U.S.-Mexico border into Texas, a lot of them are told, hey, do you want a free bus ride to New York City? They arrive in New York City. New York City says, hey, we've got a great deal for you. We're going to send you up to Plattsburgh, New York, and then you can get into Canada. And now those people are being bused from Quebec to Ontario because Quebec says it's full. Meanwhile, the U.S. may finally start paying attention to this issue, Jeanette, because reports have started to come out about a huge increase in people flying from Mexico to Canada and then walking across the border the other way.
Sure.
So
why wouldn't they, right?
It's the illegal border crossings are happening in all directions, and yes, they are illegal border crossings, whether you're claiming asylum or not. The act of crossing the border is illegal. So all of this is going on. No government is actually responding to it, dealing with it. They're playing a game of hot potato with people's lives. I don't think that's fair to anybody involved in this situation, whether it's people who are in line waiting to immigrate, people who are footing the bill, or the people who are trying to find a better life for themselves. It's not fair to anyone.
Yeah, Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us once again today.
Thank you.